This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Gary, how are you this fine Sunday at Bard?
I'm well. How are you?
Very good. Very good. Quite a week this week, I'll tell you. I think we had one comment, did we not? Did we save a comment?
I don't know that we did. I'm not certain.
Huh. Okay, well, I'll look while we're talking because I think we've got a couple of clips. I'm going to start with the talking about the Menendez case since we've been working on it. You and I were sitting in a courtroom, and as we were sitting in a courtroom across the street, the DA made an announcement, and I think we've got a little bit of tape on that, don't we?
Yes, we do.
First of all, I know that this is an area of tremendous interest nationally. We know, especially since the Netflix documentary came out, we're getting a lot of calls. Let me begin by saying, kind of walk you through a simple explanation of the legal issues here. There are two vehicles upon which people that have been convicted of a crime, well, there are many, but the two are a habeas, and the other one's a resentencing. They can ask for a review of their conviction.
So hold on, Gary, I will start with that. So for those who don't know, on the Menendez case, they were the Menendez brothers, and what he's referring to is there's been on Netflix a series, what is it, Gary? 9 episodes, I think?
Let me check. I'm not certain, but that sounds right.
I think it's 9 episodes, and it was it's a series that dropped and has caused quite a bit of controversy, including from my clients who have the Menendez brothers, who are not entirely pleased with the characterization of them or the poetic license. And I think in large part because the documentary series, I think documentary is probably a misnomer. There is a documentary that's dropping next week. This is more of a dramatization, second season, I believe, of the series. And what the complaint has been is that it was giving voice to Dominic Dunn's musings, which, Dominic Dunn, for those who don't remember who he was, had a tragedy in his own family, and in his later years, I think, was inclined. He was kind of the reporter at large for Vanity Fair, or a contributing author to Vanity Fair, and he used to speculate wildly, and he speculated wildly about the Menendezes, and I think the brothers rightfully pushed back on that. But what ended up happening is I think the backlash has worked to their advantage, because truly there is a millennial TikTok army of support for them, for people who fast forward 35 years, they've been in custody for 35 years, do not understand how in the second trial they were not allowed to bring in evidence of the abuse. Postscript, I'll tell you, because the evidence started 8 days after the acquittal of O.J. Simpson, coming on the heels of the acquittal of the officers before that, of the Rodney King beating, coming on the heels of their hung jury before 2 juries, one for each brother, which ended up the majority voting not guilty of murder for that when they were presented with abuse. So the DA's office back then in the 90s was in turmoil because of these successive losses and the fact that they couldn't win the big one. We then filed a year and a half ago, when I came on as their lawyer, the habeas. And the habeas is basically saying, we found this letter, the letter that Erik had written to his cousin Andy in the personal effects. Andy tragically died maybe a little over 20 years ago. The letter prior to the killings, dated prior to the killings, talks about the abuse. So for all of those, and the prosecutors who back then said, well, the abuse was an excuse after the fact, this predates the killings.
And the letter was written by the younger of the 2 brothers to his cousin Andy, right?
To his cousin Andy. It was written by Erik to his cousin Andy. And corroborates what Andy had testified to, and they tried to make, the prosecution tried to make Andy look like a liar. So the habeas was there. Now, since we filed the habeas, and in the last year, the legislature has also expanded what's called resentencing. And resentencing is the idea that it gives the DA or the judge the ability to recall the sentence and re-sentence somebody. They're currently serving life without parole. Those are the two options. We've been engaged, and the DA's office, to their credit, has been very serious for over a year on this. And they're getting inundated after the controversy over this series, which is presumably why the DA is doing the press conference.
Yeah, I believe Nathan Lane is playing Dominic Dunn in the series that you're referring to, which I believe is called Monsters.
So correct. And Nathan Lane, I think, pushed back on the complaints that they had as well, and I think has been savaged online as well. It's amazing the resonance that this case has 35 years later with kids who are under 25 years old.
Yeah, it's. I was just talking to my parents about it, and they were explaining that to me. I haven't watched any of the series myself, but they said that these young kids are just absolutely rabid, and they're stirring up quite a storm on social media.
I've received, and I mentioned before, Gary and I are in trial across the street from the DA's office, which is the Hall of Justice, where the criminal courts building. And we came outside and did a press conference right after we were in trial, responding to the press conference he had. And after that, they were covering that live. I can't tell you the number of friends of mine's kids or grandkids that texted me, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids. I get you tomorrow, your turn, rabid about it.
Yeah. Mark, a fun fact about that is you, at the end of court, the day that you did that press conference, you handed me something and asked me to take it back to the office, and then casually said you were going to walk back to the office after the press conference. I had no idea what you were talking about. And I got back to the office and looked up at one of the TVs at Engine, and I saw you on TV speaking. So that was an interesting turn of events for me. So, yeah. But
and by the way, Gary is there for those of you who are saying, why is Gary trying the case with you? The case we are trying, which we may talk about next week, is very video centric. Wouldn't you say, Gary? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a trial that's got a large video component, and so Mark's brought me in as sort of a technical advisor, and it's very interesting. Mark refers to me as Mr. Smith, and it's a weird environment at first for me, but I'm certainly having fun and learning a lot, and it's unusual to get to see a criminal trial from that point of view when you've not been working in the legal profession your whole life like you have.
And you get along marvelously with the court staff. The judge obviously likes you, and Gary's even got the DA helping him out at times.
Yes, everyone's been extremely, extremely nice to me, and I'm trying to give it back, and it's a cordial environment. You might think that everyone's at each other's throats at all times, but that's there's times for that, and then there's times that everyone realizes that they're all professionals, and people keep up a level of courteousness that is enjoyable.
Yeah, it's a tough case. We'll talk about it. It's a murder case. Anyway, so what is happening now is that the DA is making a decision as to, we had continued, the judge had ordered that the DA's office respond to our habeas, which is great. And we have been supplying information to the judge over the course of the last year. We've actually done a conditional exam. You were present, were you not, Gary?
I was, absolutely. Yeah, I assisted on the technical aspect of that as well.
Yeah, so we did a conditional exam of the matriarch of the Menendez family, and also after that, 24 family members, virtually everyone, but to save one or two, have signed on to a letter to the DA that they want the brothers resentenced. And so we've been doing all of that, and we are cautiously optimistic that the DA is going to join with us in asking the judge for a resentencing. You can play a little bit more of that press conference of his.
Yep.
Just the thumping on the.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay. Thank you. Yeah. Under a in this case, we've gotten petitions for the brothers on both. Under a habeas, basically what someone that was convicted is asking a review of new evidence that had been made available. That had that evidence been available to the court and the jury at the time of the trial, perhaps the outcome may have been different. And then there's a second process, and it's called resentencing under California law, where a prosecutor can evaluate whether someone has been rehabilitated, and based on their actions and the fact that they're not involved in criminal activity inside the prison, that their sentence could be reevaluated. In this case, again, the Menendez brothers are asking for a review through both of those vehicles. We have not decided on the outcome. We are reviewing the information, but I think it's also important that we recognize that both men and women can be the victims of sexual assault. We started a consent campaign.
Oh, time out here, because then we'll move to one other case. So it's interesting. We'll keep you posted. I'm like I said, cautiously optimistic. I'm hopeful. I think we've got the better of the arguments in terms of resentencing. People have been asking ever since then all weekend what's your preference? I think Kim Kardashian as well weighed in. Did she not, Gary, make a statement?
She did. She wrote an essay basically lining up with the brothers and saying that, all of the things that you have kind of outlined here, that, at the time that this happened, it was not, as socially acceptable to admit that sexual abuse is perpetrated upon both men and women. And, she makes the point that we probably would have treated the Menendez sisters very differently if they had, in fact, been the victims of abuse who went on to commit such a crime. She's not excusing the crime by any stretch of the imagination. She is simply pointing out that, had everything been taken into account, it might very well be a different world. And I encourage everyone to go read her piece. You can find it on NBC. Just Google Kim Kardashian Menendez and you'll find it. And I think she makes a compelling argument.
Yeah, I agree. And she's been doing great work in the criminal justice arena. And this is one of the few cases that is maybe high profile, I would say, if not the first case that she's gotten involved in. Normally she takes cases where, I remember that old expression that Johnny Cochran, or maybe it was Sean Hawley quoting Johnny Cochran, that I do OJ and I do no J. And she's been specializing in no J. And, it was interesting. I was thinking about Johnny also. I heard a clip that Erik Menendez had said, and that he had, when he was in the cell near OJ, they were talking, and went back when they were in county jail together, that OJ wanted to change lawyers. And Eric's lawyer was one of my woman that I just thought was, ahead of her time in terms of what a great lawyer she was, Leslie Abramson. And Leslie was friends with Johnny. I was more of a mentee to Johnny, and she had referred OJ to Johnny, and the rest is history.
That's very interesting. That's wild. It's hard to.
It's wild also when you think about the fact that, but for Johnny, I don't know that OJ would have been acquitted, number one. And but for OJ being acquitted, I don't know that Erik and Lyle would still be in prison. I think they probably would have, if OJ had not been acquitted 8 days prior to their second trial, I don't know that the rulings would have drastically changed to the point where they were basically robbed of a defense and basically it was a directed verdict the second trial around, and they get murder and life without parole as opposed to manslaughter, and they would have done the maximum amount of time for manslaughter already. 35 years is more than any the maxed out manslaughter consecutive. So there is a certain irony there as well. I mean, this case is filled with those kinds of ironies.
Can I ask, is there a timeline on this? Is there a limit or a time frame in which the DA's office has to operate, or are they just at their leisure?
No, the judge granted on the 1st. We have an order somewhere. I should have sent it to you. He granted and signed on October 1st, continuing their response on the habeas to November 26th. And obviously, we were in court at the time of the press conference, but I've watched most of the press conference, and I believe that the DA has said that well prior to that deadline of November 26th, they're going to make a decision. And he also said he's the one who's going to make the decision. So
interesting. So sometime before Thanksgiving, we'll have an answer one way or another, right?
Yep, that's exactly right. Then let's segue into one of our favorite cases. You've got I've
actually got 2 clips from that case, and we're going to start with the more fun one, I suppose, less consequential. This was someone who was testifying in the Young Thug case, and he's given a little bit of the business to the prosecutor who is questioning him.
On August 5th, 2015.
I can answer and explain, right?
Absolutely.
I don't remember, but start to know he was dead wrong talking to me, knowing how my mind was. Y'all put a autistic junkie in the interrogation room and expecting him to be honest.
Okay.
Now, the audio was a little low there. I'll try to pump it in post, but for anyone who might not be able to hear it, the gentleman says, you guys are dead wrong for putting an autistic junkie in a room and expecting him to be honest. And he's referring to himself there. So we've seen a few people giving the business back to the prosecutors when they're being examined. And I just thought that one was kind of interesting.
I've never seen such recalcitrant witnesses. I mean, generally these cases these types of prosecutions are marred by people who don't want to testify for a variety of reasons. But this case really is a primer on recalcitrant witnesses or witnesses who are being forced. You'll remember that this judge is sitting on this trial because the previous judge had a secret meeting that he did not disclose to the defense, where he was basically browbeating a witness who did not want to testify in chambers.
Yeah, and threatening him with staying in jail for several years until the trial was completed if he didn't testify. And it's not just the witnesses that are displeased with the DA; it is also the newly sitting judge. And let's watch this clip.
On August.
A mistrial is appropriate. And I'm asking.
I can't figure out what it is. If it's disingenuous, if it is that, I don't want to malign the prosecutor standing in front of me right now. So I'm not going to say the possible things that it could be, but it is baffling to me that somebody with the number of years of experience that you have, time after time after time, continues to seemingly purposefully hide the ball to the extent you possibly can for as long as you possibly can. And I really don't want to believe that it is purposeful. But honestly, after a certain number of times, you start to wonder how it could be anything but that, unless it is just that you are so unorganized that you are throwing this case together as you try it. And I am sorry to say that, but this case is being made much more difficult for everybody because of the haphazard way in which it is being presented. I'm going to take a recess for a few minutes. I'll have a ruling when I get back.
Now, I'll ask your read, but my read certainly is that judge just took a recess because she was afraid of what else she might say.
That is the judicial equivalent of stupid or liar. And
correct.
You could call it haphazard or, she's baffled. Part of the problem is, we've talked about this in the framework of other cases, they're requesting a mistrial. And she is frustrated. I'm going to tell you what's going through her mind and why she's so frustrated. The record is awful for the prosecutors. They have been playing hide the ball the entire time in this case. It's just awful. However, if she grants that mistrial because of prosecutorial misconduct, Then there is that Oregon v. Kennedy case that you and I have talked about a million times, U.S. Supreme Court case that says normally when you ask for a mistrial, that you being the defense, you don't get to invoke once in jeopardy. You don't get to say you can't try me again. In the specific instance of Oregon v. Kennedy, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled if the prosecution has goaded, that's the term they use, where the progeny is used, into a mistrial, the defense into a mistrial, that can form the basis for a once in jeopardy and bar subsequent prosecution. And that's a heavy, heavy lift. That's essentially what happened in the Alex Baldwin case, in the state case. That's essentially what is happening here. Interestingly, you're seeing in some of these televised cases just what we have been talking about and complaining about for over a decade.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand why the judge is so reluctant to grant the motion for mistrial, but it certainly sounds, watching that clip, like she's getting very close to fed up and willing to just rip that Band-Aid off, even if it is just, a very dangerous precedent to set.
Yeah, it's just, we'll keep an eye on it. It's wild. We'll talk about our murder case next week. Gary, thank you. I appreciate it. I screwed you up all day today, and that's my fault. I was trying to go off the grid today, and I was spectacularly unsuccessful.
Yeah, off the grid you were not, but that's okay. Mark, thanks for making some time, and I will see you in court Monday morning.
Thank you. Thanks, Gary. Talk to you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.